that first night, I won a few $1,000s. And man, I mean, from then on out, it was like, I was like, why do people work? Once you get to a certain level, it's just never enough. And if you don't know your limits, you need to stay far, far, far away.
Hey everybody, hope that you're doing well. This is going to be my next episode of the One Day at a Time Gambling Addiction Podcast. My name is Rob, I'm your host, and I'm really excited about this episode. I just wanted to drop in real quick before we get into the content to let you know that I'm sorry for the video quality. We did what we could, but we were working with some technical difficulties. However, the audio quality is there, and this is an amazing story you're going to want to listen to all the way through. If you do get the chance, please smash that subscribe button, as I'm working really hard to deliver content to you on gambling addiction recovery, and by subscribing, you're helping me to spread my message to more people around the world. So, I'll shut up. Please drop a like, drop a comment on what you think of the video, and let's get into this content. Today, I'm joined by guest Mark Owens, and we're going to be talking about the harm that gambling can bring into your life. Mark, how you doing tonight?
Oh, doing great, man. Doing great.
Very good to hear. So, Mark, before we jump into the meat of today's content, do you want to do a little bit of an introduction for yourself? How'd you get into gambling?
Back when I'm 34 years old right now. So back when I was about 13, 14, my grandfather, who was chief of police of the city in Alabama where I'm from, him and his influential friends, they would go down to our lodge, on our family's lodge on Wednesday night, and they'd play cards and eat steak. They did it every Wednesday night for about 40 something years. And one night I went down there, of course, you know, what grandson doesn't want to be around their granddad, and went down there and was just intrigued, I think, to say the least. And so we lived right across the street from each other. And every time he cooked, he'd take my grandmother half his steak. Well, I knew that. So I'd ride my four-wheeler over to his house at a certain time because I knew when he came. And every time he'd take me until I kind of started going with him. But, you know, it led to, I was the shuffler. You know, I shuffled the cards for everybody. And then he was older. And so then I played a little. And he always said, I worry, you know, I don't want this to be a thing for you. Because like I said, I was just becoming a teenager. But, you know, these are wealthy men. And man, if they won or lost $60, it was either a good or a bad night. So they never made it about the money. It was always about the camaraderie.
So definitely you'd say at first it was just kind of about being a part of a group. And was there ever a point where it became about money, or do you think it was more about emotion the whole time for you?
Well, I'll say this, even with that small amount of money, you know, when I started playing, it was about the money. I mean, for sure, you know, at that point, and I'm a competitive person. So it was a little bit of both, but you know, $40 for a 14, 15, even, and especially when I turned 16 and started driving, you know, that was a tank and a half of gas then. So I'd have to say a little bit of both.
Gotcha. So you were about 16 during this time. Did anything like significant happen that changed the way that you were gambling in those next couple years?
So basically, over the next, I'd say 3 years, man, I'm the baby of five boys. So I had all older brothers. And that's when I started to play Texas Hold'em with them, and nothing serious, you know. There again, $60 to $100 was my biggest win probably. So, you know, no astronomical amount of money. Well, my freshman year at Auburn University, my grandfather passed away literally the day I moved up there. And at that time, my father passed away when I was younger. And so what that did was, like I said, my granddad was a successful man. So that left me at 19 years old a pretty large amount of money. And lo and behold, just one random day, overheard somebody talking about a poker game. And, you know, it went from me playing small stakes to pretty big stakes for a 19-year-old kid for sure.
I hear you. I understand that pattern. So from that point, did you keep just playing poker, or did you move on to like other types of gambling? Like, how did your gambling progress from that point forward?
So literally, as I was saying, when I heard, because the guy looked at me, you know, like any probably grown man would look at a 19-year-old kid and was like, listen, these are pretty higher stakes. And I was like, okay, you know, even then, never even doing it, I had no fear. And that's not a good thing when it comes to gambling. And it was 1-3, no limit, which I know after learning how much I've known, it's kind of odd game. It's usually 1-2, but it was 1-3. And that first night, I won a few $1,000s. And man, I mean, from then on out, it was like, I was like, why do people work? And literally that was right about the same time I started sports betting. And that was, poker, you always had to bring the money. See, sports betting back then, we all had bookies, and I was never, if I had credit, I'd bet it. Not, it didn't matter if I had the money or not.
So when you were betting sports, was it for you? Because for me, I reflect and I look back and I think that after, a couple months, it stopped being about the amounts I was betting and it was more just about having fun during the game. I was like, it gave me a reason to watch the games. Do you think that sports betting changed the way that you saw sports? Were you able to watch
One,
sports after that without betting?
At 100%. And see, what was crazy was, man, I'm a sports fanatic. I love it all. And after I started betting on it, then me and my friends would always joke the Tuesday night MAC action. Nobody cares about Northern Illinois and Eastern, Michigan or whatever it was. Well, hey, you put a few $100s on there, it'd get real interesting. And so 100%, after gambling, my whole view to sports changed for sure.
I got you. Yeah, I've been hearing that often. A lot of people have been asking me about that, so I thought I'd get your opinion on.
Yeah, 100%.
Looking forward into your story. So now at this point you're in college. It's been a couple years into college. You've been betting up and down swings, I'm sure, just as any gambler.
Exactly.
Was there anything else that came along in your life that made things tougher that you were using for maybe another addiction, maybe something that was negative in your life come into play?
Yes. So I very much at this time, well, honestly, just like the gambling, I never saw it as an addiction, but I was very much using drugs frequently, smoking weed daily. And pain pills were, man, the first time I ever took them, it was just something I always wanted to go back to. But I justified it by it was a weekend. It was a social drug for me. So it was a Friday, Saturday, and that was it. And it was like that for a long time.
I hear you. And that's also how I think a lot of people start with gambling. It's something that you're doing with your friends. And then out of nowhere, it just gets to a point where you're off on your own. And
Exactly.
I have to imagine it's similar with other addictions. Did anything really blow up? Like, what was your turning point to think that maybe you could start moving in a different direction? Did anything specifically happen that you decided you hit your wall, you've had enough, and it was time to do something else with life? Or
So there's two moments that came for me. One was around 2013, 2014, and I so my whole family grew up rodeoing. My dad was a world champion. My brothers were all champions, and my brother passed away. Unfortunately, one of my brothers. Well, our rodeo finals are held in Biloxi, Mississippi, and that's the closest legal casinos I have near. So that, like I said, I believe at this time he passed away in 2014, so it had to be maybe 14 or 15. But that January, I went. So I borrowed like $150, $200 from a friend. I got like $150 from my mom. I think I had enough money to put gas in my car, and I bought some. See, Xanax and pain pills were kind of my thing, and I couldn't find any pain pills, so for some reason I bought Xanax. Well, I go down there that night, and I'll never forget. Later in the night, man, I was hotter than hot could be at the blackjack table. Crowd was getting around me, and a guy came up to me And see, at that point, I take off the table because I didn't want him to know how much I was winning. And at that point, a guy asked, how are you doing good? You doing good? He's like, you got a crowd. And I said, grab my back pocket. And it was filled with 25 and green and black chips, 25 and $100 chips. And I remember asking for a room. And of course, they comped me a room. And of course, I'm drinking and taking Xanax at this time. And if you don't know anything about Xanax, it will make you forget everything, especially with alcohol. I woke up the next morning in a king suite, just like, oh no, please have the money. And I looked and I had like multiple $1,000s. So I turned $200 into a few $1,000s. And man, I was on cloud nine. Told everybody, that was another thing. I made sure people knew about it because I thought that's what, made me. And I'll never forget my sister-in-law saying, hey, let me have a majority of it. Well, that night, what do you think happened? I gave all that back. Of course, man, I can talk my way in or out of anything. I talked random people into loaning me money and lost that. And I'll never forget, man, it was my lowest gambling point at that time in my life. And man, of all things, I took a bunch of those Xanax, a bunch of alcohol, and I got in the jacuzzi at the hotel and tried to drop the hair dryer in the jacuzzi and kill myself. And of course, nowadays they have it's like a breaker, and so it, of course, will turn off. But I wake up. I mean, of course, I passed out from all the drugs, and I woke up, and man, that was when I knew it was too much, and I knew I had a problem. And so honestly, I came back and I made this Facebook video. And to tell you the truth, Rob, it was for attention because that's how lost I was. And I stayed clean per se, didn't gamble for a few months, but it didn't last long.
I hear you. And it's tough to hear that like the combination of both things that you were going through ended up making things like so much worse. And I know that's the same with a lot of people. And especially when you try to quit one addiction and you kind of just switch into the other one. So I think that sharing your
Yeah.
story about this, it's really important because people might think that like a lot of people don't think gambling's a real addiction. When you hear just how much harm it can cause in combination with other things going on in life, it just puts it into perspective. So I do thank you for sharing that part of your story.
Well, and that's a blessing. That's a blessing,
Yeah.
that why I really wanted to get connected with you and why I loved what you're doing because, man, I speak for a living now, share my testimony a lot to drug addicts, because that's clearly, with this opioid pandemic we had recent, with all the Oxycontin and everything, that's especially at schools and go to churches. I go to a lot of places, but gambling, I mean, and don't get me wrong, I talk about gambling, but people just don't see it as you and I see it. That's for sure, 100%.
Yeah, it's usually referred to as like a silent addiction because, with drugs or alcohol, you can see it. You can either see it, smell
Exactly.
it, hear it, something like that. But gambling is very silent and it pairs with a lot of other addictions. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So, you go home and life goes on. What was like the next significant thing that happened to you? Maybe what led you to do what you do now, which we still haven't really even touched on yet.
So that's why I wanted to mention the gambling because that was like my first big like, okay, I've got a gambling problem. That was the first time. The next week or 2 weeks was the first time I openly went to a meeting and said, my name's Mark Owens. I'm an addicted gambler. So I had to put that in there. So this led to, like I said, man, it didn't take that. And at that meeting, I told you this before, but at that meeting, a man came up to me afterwards and he said, Mark, he said, get ready. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, I'm telling you. And this was a Christian based meeting. And he said, the devil's going to come and he's going to tempt you when you least expect it. And I was like, man, I got you. I'm ready. Because I felt so good for finally releasing that. And man, I was living with a friend because like I said, it was not a few months after my brother passed away, and it was, a friend allowed me to come move in with him, one of my best friends, and I wasn't working at that time. And sure enough, from that same casino, because like I said, I won all that money, so they looked like to them I was a big player. And sure enough, I go check the mail, and it was a $500 free play. And what do you think my mind did? It's not my money. I was like, I'm not going to lose anything. So I made sure that I had enough gas to get down there and back. And sure enough, man, I went down there and I played two, maybe three shoots. It was like 2:30 in the afternoon. And I'll never forget it. This one guy split twos like three times, and the end of the shoot, ended up winning like again a few $1,000s. And this lady looked at me and she said, "Honey, you need to leave." And I looked at her for the first time in my life, and I said, "You're right." And I got up, went straight to the cashier. They had not parked my car yet in valet. And I got in my car, tipped them $100, and hightailed it my 3.5 hour trip back, because I knew I'd make it back by dinner. And for those next 3.5 hours, I said, I got this. I got this. I can do this. And at that point, like I said, it was just, I was right back down the rabbit hole. And so that led through years, and let's see, 4 years, man, of ups and downs. I mean, pawning, title loans, you name it, man, I did it. I've always liked nice things. So when I was up and winning, I'd buy things. And when I was down and losing, I'd pawn them, because I never sell them, or, because I didn't want anybody to know. And this all led to 2019, man. It was 2019, end of 18 and 19 was the biggest highs and lows of my life. I just bought a house. I was 29 years old, paid for, wrote a check for it, great house, got a great job, man, was doing good. And I started to really experience more with drugs and opiates. And I had a man look at me one time and he said, "Man, I didn't know pain pills were a gateway drug." And Rob, they're not. What it is, it's your tolerance. You take one, then you take two, then you take four, and it's just steadily. Well, what happened was I was taking a simple narcotic that you get for breaking an arm, the tooth removal. Well, then I got to higher stuff that you get when you're on cancer and stuff. And July 16th, 2019 was a dark, dark day in my life. It was the first time ever that I thought I was using heroin, and it was fentanyl. And maybe 5 minutes after I took two little key bumps, two little snorts, I crashed my work truck at that time, going 75 miles an hour in the interstate where I live. Of course, quit my job. Well, what does a gambler do? What was a hustler do in my mind? I sold my house. And literally within, man, I think it was 3 months, I went through that whole house. I had to sell a Rolex to be able to go to my free trip that the casino gave me to Las Vegas. And that ultimately led to July 16th is crazy, man. It was a year to the day. And I was at the lowest of low. COVID, I was 31 years old, living with my mother in her 2-bedroom apartment. She was in a serious relationship. It was a horrible situation. And July 16th, 2020, man, enough was enough. And got in a fight with a friend on a golf course and said, "What do you want me to do? Go kill myself?" And he said, "Yeah." And that's all I needed to know. And at that time, I had, per my understanding now, about 100 times the lethal dosage of fentanyl on me. And within about 30 minutes, I sent 2 words to my 3 brothers and my mother and said, "I'm sorry." And ultimately, I attempted to kill myself. And because I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I looked down and saw that bag of drugs and said, "There's no way I'll live through that." And I did them all. And fortunately, as well as you all can see, God had different plans for my life. And that's kind of where all this came from here on out.
So where did that lead to from here on out? What are you doing today? Because it's been about 3 years since that point. How's life treating you?
Yeah, man, to say to say God's changed my life and is an understatement. I'm very a big believer, but I also somebody might be watching this that's not, and a lot of people disagree with what I'm about to say, but God didn't God didn't make me. God didn't heal me from the addiction. I'm still an addict today. But what God did was give me a purpose for my life. And because there's people that have been sober and clean of many addictions that are not believers for 30, 40, 50 years. So I tell people, people say you have to have Jesus Christ to be clean. I hate to say it, but that's not the truth. But you do have to have Jesus Christ to have a purpose in life. And man, after that, I actually checked myself into a rehab and found a calling for ministry. And my mentor, I started in jail ministry because he liked my story because, man, I had it all. I had everything literally given to me, handed to me throughout my lifetime. And God literally had to take all that away to really make me understand what mattered the most. And that was Jesus Christ, and that was it. So I can go into a jail, and for the people that didn't have anything, I could be like, it doesn't matter. The devil doesn't pick and choose. He takes whoever he can. But man, I spent 3 months in rehab, and about 100 days after that attempted suicide, I stepped back into jail as a minister and was able to do a jail ministry and still be a part of one, almost 3 years later. And that led to I remember when he told me, he said, there's no telling where this can take you. And through that, man, I've been blessed to, like I said, go to schools and churches and youth rallies and really share my story, how God has changed my life and given me direction, given me a purpose. And man, actually, October 1st will be 2 years that I've been a pastor here in Central Alabama. So it's a crazy, crazy transition and a fast one. Honestly, for sure. It's been a ride to say the least.
Yeah, I can hear. Well, I'm sending you congratulations. That's a great accomplishment that you've been 2 years. Now, what I think is an interesting point of what you've said was it wasn't until the point that you found your purpose that you felt satisfied, that life was going to go well. All those years leading up to it, do you think that you were using the gambling and using the drugs to cover up or like hold off on seeking that purpose? Do you think they were to like fill an emotional void rather than, just the high itself or the chance to win money itself? Do you think there was the emotion behind it?
Oh, yeah. See, you said something earlier that and I was going to wait till the right time, and clearly it's now. But you said gambling, at first it was with friends and everything. Rob, at the end, I didn't do this with anybody. The casino I went to let me bring my dog. Like literally in the presidential suite, they allowed me to take my dog in there, and that was it. But see, it was when I walked in, hey, Mr. Owens, how are you? Every pit boss knew me. Man, I felt like I was somebody. And see, that's the thing. My whole life, man, I went to a school this morning and shared my story. And, I told them, and I'm never, shy away from that opportunity. But I told them at that time in my life, I was the most selfish, arrogant prick that I've ever known and ever will know, honestly. And that was the thing. I loved people, but I never loved anybody as much as I loved myself. And so that was the thing. I was seeking for something that I never could find.
I hear you. And I think that a lot of people that are in recovery for gambling addiction specifically probably do feel that way from time to time.
because we've grown
Hmm.
so much from learning about the things that you can do to become a better person that looking back, you feel a little bit of regret. But in doing so, it actually leads me to a question I thought I'd ask you. If you could go back 10 years from this day, so I guess that's about 7 years before things hit their lowest point for you. Do you have anything that you would tell yourself?
God, man, that's a tough one. You know, I had somebody, I was in a meeting actually just the other night, and her exact response to me was, she goes, Mark, she said, at the end of the day, she said, everything you do, you're all in. And at the end of the day, that's something I probably would tell myself to slow down, and take one day at a time. See, I was living still in the past and living in the future, and man, I just had no recollection of time. But also, I'd say slow down and learn to respect money. Man, I just, unfortunately, man, and there's no other way to say it than other than I was just truly blessed, but I just thought it was something we had. I had no recollection, of really how much, now I'm married and it's like, she knows everything. And, it's hard because she's sitting here thinking like we could have a house paid for, we could have everything paid for and done for if I didn't make the mistakes I made. So probably that would be two things. Slow down, take one day at a time, and really learn and understand to respect money.
I think those are great pieces of advice. And I mean, with gambling specifically in casinos, it can become even easier to disrespect money because, you're not playing with $100 bills in front of you, you're playing with those little
Exactly.
pieces of plastic. So that is a good point, and that's a lesson that people unfortunately don't learn until it's too late. So that would be a great thing if I could go back and tell myself. That was a good one. Leading into it, so the point of my podcast is to kind of dive into the reality of gambling today. And we're dealing with a world of gambling where things are just at your fingertips. You can gamble instantly, you can gamble from
Exactly.
anywhere. So it's really dangerous, but it's also really important that people understand how bad things can get. And I think that having this conversation, we've gone into some of the bad things that could happen if you let it slip too far. But if you were to go and talk like you do to a group of, say, high schoolers, we'll call them, just about to be the age in which they can gamble legally, do you have any advice for them? Like if they say, should I start gambling? Should they start gambling, or should they stay away from it completely like it's something that can completely kill them? Do you have any opinion on that?
Um, Man, I kind of have agree with both. When I was thinking about that question, that's a hard subject because I mean, honestly, I would say no. I would say never start. Because I also at this same meeting I was at, I heard somebody talk about it, and this is the problem. His exact statement. He was telling someone that's never gambled, and he said, "Hey, so and so, the thing is, man, you can bet $10. And if you hit every one of these 10 games, man, you'll win thousands upon thousands." And that's the key. That's the key. You're always chasing the next thing and you're never happy enough. And that was the understanding. I told you before, and Dan Blazarian used to be somebody I looked up to. Now I would say no, but he made that comment. He said once you get to a certain level, it's just never enough. And that's the thing. If you can do it, I mean, I still have friends that gamble, and I don't shun them. I don't say, "Hey, man, you're going to hell." It's not like that. But I just warn people, if they never have, don't ever start it. That's no different, honestly, with me, with drinking or anything. And you have to know your limits. And if you don't know your limits, you need to stay far, far, far away.
That's a great point because a lot of the people that are going to be watching this, they're not going to be gambling addicts. They're going to be people who may gamble responsibly. They may gamble from time to time. And I've been doing these live streams where I field questions from people, and almost all of them say they're recreational gamblers in one way or another. They say that. And it can be really difficult for me to explain it to them. But as gambling addicts, we
Yeah.
know that once we're gambling for a reason that's not for fun and it's a reason that's out of
Yeah.
control, that's when it needs to become something that you're looking at fixing. So I think that you do make a great point. You shouldn't, I don't recommend starting either. But if you are going to start, you need to be really aware of how you're feeling, because 6 years can go by, 10 years can go by. And
Mm-hmm.
by the time you get to the end, it's like you never even moved in life. And it's because of gambling, but you don't realize it until it's too late.
And that's
But
my thing. You said it, Rob, but I also, at this point, I want to make a simple statement to anyone that watches this. If you don't think this is serious, mark my words. We're sitting here, April 26th, 2023, that at the point gambling is going, I'm not going to say when, but it will become something that is just as or worse than this opioid pandemic we've been through. Because, as you said before, when I was high as a kite on multiple different drugs, I'd have to be secluded. Everybody would know. But I could have lost everything I owned 20 minutes before this podcast, and you wouldn't have a clue because I look no different. And you can hide it so much more. And see, that's the thing. Rob, is it not crazy nowadays when you look at Sports Center? You can't turn on ESPN and FanDuel and DraftKings not come up. And man, they're throwing out the craziest just to try to get you in there. And that's the thing. You feel that first win, and it's no difference than drugs. And I know people are going to be like, this guy's crazy. And I am a little crazy. But at the end of the day, you will never, ever, ever catch that same feeling you had after that first win, and you'll chase it forever.
I think that it's really powerful that you say that and you've experienced both things. So if I was to say that, people might not give it as much credibility, but seeing that we've heard your story, the fact that you're saying it's just as dangerous and the feeling is just as strong, I hope that gets people that are listening to this to wake up to the severity of it when it gets to be this bad of an addiction. So thank you so much for sharing that part of your story. Do you have any piece of final advice? What's the best advice that you heard during your gambling addiction recovery?
Know yourself. Know who you are before you ever go there. Because as I said before, I have an addictive personality. Anything I do, I'm all in. And at the end of the day, saying no was always been a problem of mine. I used to, this is a horrible thing to say, but I used to make the comment, I'll try anything once. And that's such a horrible way to live. And so at the end of the day, man, gambling, yeah, it was fun. I can't say it wasn't, but going out and as now my life, going out and sharing how God's changed my life and done so much in my life, and working and earning money, it's such a better feeling. It's security, just be careful. I'll never tell somebody who can handle it that they shouldn't do it, but if it was up to my, hey, at the end of the day, I'll end it with this, Rob. At the end of the day, what's the famous saying we've always heard? Those big casinos didn't get that big, and all those lights and those multi-billion-dollar operations for nothing. So at the end of the day, you're just literally making that billionaire that much richer.
That is very, very true. Well, Mark, thank you for coming on tonight. I know that recently you actually just got married, so I wanted to congratulate you on that. I want it to be something that people can see that no matter how low things got, it can always turn around and life can get better. Through finding your purpose, through quitting your addictions, and through finding like something to do with your life that contributes and helps others, this is what can happen. And you're an inspiration to me. That's why I wanted to have you on here tonight, because I really do think your story is powerful. I think it's going to help a lot of people. So with that, we're going to wrap this episode up. And as always, guys, let's keep getting better together, one day at a time. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Rob.